to what I think is a very important moment for our congressional district. We're about ready to enter into an election cycle that can really change the course of what we're currently experiencing and change the course for the positive for what we're currently experiencing in Washington. So on behalf of the Lake Tahoe Democrats, South Lake Tahoe Democrats, I'm Norma Santiago, Vice Chair. I wish to welcome you to what I feel is going to be a very informative meeting, a very informative forum. I'm trying to say that real quick. I could have been a comedian. Anyway, at this point I'd like to introduce Rachel from the Solidarity Network, who's one of our sponsors. And also Nick from
the Tahoe Climate Change Action Network.
All right. We are very grateful to these organizations that helped us in putting this together. And like I said, we planned on having a very informative time.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Again, Nick Exline from the Tahoe Climate Change Action Network. We have a table right over there. The City of South Lake Tahoe, as many of you probably know, voted to go 100% renewable by 2032. Truckee, we're the largest city in CA4. Truckee is going to be voting on the same thing November 28th. Kind of the next logical step seemed to be we should make CA4 the first congressional district to go 100% renewable. If you're interested in helping, sign up and we will do it together. Thank you so much.
I'm Rachel from the South Lake Tahoe Solidarity Network. We have a few flyers over there, and we also brought Flat Tom with us. If you haven't heard about Flat Tom, so Tom McClintock is our current congressman in this district. Hopefully that will change soon. He has not been to South Lake Tahoe to do a forum like this in at least a year and a half, I believe, almost 2 years, despite many invitations. So we made a flat version so that the people can talk to Tom anyway. If you have something you would like to tell him, you can write it on a Post-it note, slap it on his face, and we will deliver the message at some point, and then also try to gather information about what's important to the constituents in this district and in this city, and deliver that information to the candidates as well so they know who they're talking to. And there's information over there about our group as well if you're interested. So thank you.
All right, here we go. And as always, there's some guidelines in terms of the format, and so I'm going to ask if you could please be patient with me as we go through this. We're going to start first with each candidate will have an opportunity to introduce themselves. We're giving them 3 minutes to introduce themselves so that you guys get to know who they are. This forum is divided into 2 segments. The first segment are what we call issue questions. These are questions that are being brought forth by members of the community of issues that have been communicated to us as critical for the folks in this district. After that, what we will do with each question, we will draw a name. The first person that's name is called will have 2.5 minutes to respond to the question, after which the other 2 will have 1.5 minutes to either rebut or add or whatever to that question. We have a timekeeper here. Mary, raise your hand. Who is going to give the candidates a 15-second warning. I keep saying 15 minutes. Oh my God, we'll be here forever. A 15-second warning. Okay, so that'll be the first half. We will then take a break. And the second half will be part of audience participation questions. So, at your seats, you would have seen 2 documents. One is a blank index card. So during the course of the discussion or while they're talking, a question might come to your head. Please jot it down. Raise your hand very quietly so as not to distract anybody or your neighbor. And either hand it to Allison or Liz, and there's John back there as well, okay? The second sheet is for you to provide us with feedback on the candidates. We will not be collecting those till at the end of the form, all right? During the question and answer phase, your questions will be asked by John Friedrich, who is moderating with me this evening. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to that question, all right? Are we clear? Do we have any questions? Now, this is the hard part. I know how excited we are about the prospect of actually having a really good, strong representative out of this district to represent us in Washington, D.C. I know how excited we are. But please, hold your applause as they answer these questions. That way we can move through this as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Are we cool? Try to contain yourself. I'm one of those that has a problem with enthusiasm. Because I get very enthusiastic. So anyway, candidates, are we ready? Okay. You know what I'm going to do? I am going to draw names to see who's going to be first for your introductions. And again, you have 3 minutes. Okay, Jessica?
All right. This is our mic tonight. Thank you so much for hosting us this evening, and thank you all for coming out on such a rainy night. And this is what democracy in action looks like, and I'm proud to be out here with all of you. I'm Jessica Morse. I'm a 5th-generation Northern Californian. My great-great-grandparents came over on covered wagons and landed in our gorgeous Sierra foothills. Unlike the Donner Party, they actually made it. And we still have that original forest homestead land to this day that we have sustainably logged and maintained as a healthy forest for over a century. I grew up a little further down the hill in Carmichael, and my mother instilled in me a very deep commitment to community service. We would spend our weekends cleaning up rivers, cleaning up trails, volunteering with the nursing home, and I learned early on that a service-driven life is a purpose-filled life. I took that commitment to service and I dedicated myself to serving my country and humanity all over the world. I started out in Ethiopia doing famine relief work, and in Nepal teaching women to be trekking guides because I'm a mountaineering guide out here in the Sierras. And then I went off to Baghdad at the height of the war in 2005. And I called my mom and I said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'm going to Iraq. This is for your own spiritual growth." And I got out there and I was 23 years old and I hadn't realized exactly what I'd gotten into. Every day there were mortars and rockets coming in. Every day we were getting shot at. Every day I was standing side by side with our troops. And I gained a compassion for what it means for our troops to go overseas and what that sacrifice looks like. And it wasn't just their own physical safety. I walked into our office one day and one of my colleagues, a big Marine in his digital camouflage uniform, was weeping. And I said, "Oh my God, what's wrong? Who's died?" And he said, "My wife is at home having our first child, and the video feed just went dead." It is critical that our members of Congress who decide whether or not our troops go to war understand firsthand what that sacrifice looks like. I dedicated myself to trying to keep the world stable and safe because I wanted to ensure that we could keep our troops at home. One of the important lessons I learned when I came home from Iraq was actually talking to a couple cousins of mine. And these are 2 cousins who watch different cable news channels, if you get my drift. And one of them was talking all about WMDs and who lied about them. And the other was talking about the Saddam Hussein trial and the newfound freedom of the Iraqi people. Neither of them were talking about the rise of the insurgency, which was destabilizing the region and would later come back as ISIS. I said to my cousins, trying to describe Iraq through a red lens or a blue lens is like trying to describe a rainbow using 2 colors. We need to be able to see the whole picture to solve the problem, and that's why I'm running for Congress, to ensure that we can solve the root problems and see the entire picture and not look through party lenses, but look through community lenses. And that's my commitment to my community that I know and love. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's the only time I'll allow applause.
Oh, come on.
Rosa, you're up next.
For time's sakes, I'm not gonna walk around. My name is Rosa Calderon and I'm running for Congress in this district, my home. District 4 is enormous. As you must know, we have the beautiful Lake Tahoe. It encompasses the sequoias, the ridges of Kings Canyon National Park, and our crown jewel of our national park system, Yosemite. Through the foothills, the Sierra Nevada, and into the Central Valley, the people of this region are hardworking, honest, and law-abiding citizens for whom the American dream has really failed. Right now, we find ourselves in the middle of a political revolution, and we can't afford to sit this one out any longer. We have to make sure that we are fighting for the heart of this nation, which is the people. We have to make sure that everything that was set out, the principles that were laid out in front of us by our founding fathers, remain. And that our government is held accountable because they're not representing us, they're representing corporations. We demand change. My life story, doesn't start in the US, it goes back to El Salvador. I migrated to the United States as a refugee from El Salvador during a period of time when it was ravaged by the civil wars. At that time, the press was silenced, and anyone who spoke about the injustices within the government was putting their life at risk, and that's what my mother did. But she really believed in the American dream, and she believed in the land of opportunity, and she knew that this was her only chance. So she immigrated to the United States. And our life wasn't easy. You know, we had a lot of hardships. When we first landed in the United States, my first few years, we lived down in Southern California in Huntington Park. So we were there during the Rodney King trial, the riots that took out our store, and we were there for many other things that really showed me that being united and having that urge to be an activist is necessary in a nation that's a melting pot like this. At the kitchen table, we spoke about everything that was happening across the world, the civil unrest in the USSR, Southern America, and Central America. But that was just before I was 9 years old. And then we moved to Lincoln, which is a very small town, and if many of you know it, it's in Placer County. And that's where I grew up. I learned how important it is to do your due diligence for your community, for hard work, and it's actually where I started my family as well. But today I'm a geoscientist, I'm a small business owner, and I want to make sure that all the things, the opportunities that my mom allowed me through the risks that she took are still there for the next generation. I am making this effort and fighting because I have walked in the shoes of a minority woman who's very seldomly given an opportunity. But I do this and I continue to march, to protest, to occupy because of my daughter. And because I want to make sure that future generations have the same opportunity. So I will fight for things that McClintock doesn't want us to fight for. I will fight for women. I will fight for our economic prosperity. I will also fight for healthcare justice, which we're lacking. And I invite you to join me in this fight today.
Thank you. Regina.
All right, thank you so much. Now I see some familiar faces here and some new folks. Those of you who know me know that I'm usually a pretty law-abiding person, somebody who plays by the rules. But we've been given one rule here tonight that I want to encourage you to break. I want to encourage us to make a little bit of noise to get started. Now, Tom McClintock, he lives all the way over in Elk Grove. You guys have done a little clapping tonight, but I don't think he heard you. So I want to ask, who's ready to get rid of Tom McClintock next year? All right, that's more like it. I'm sure he heard it all the way over there, a couple hours away. All right, so I'm Regina Bateson. I grew up right here in the district, down in Roseville, and my childhood encompassed the whole region. We would come camping in Sly Park, I've even been swimming in Emerald Bay more than once, no matter how cold it is. Had a few visits to the Tahoe Forest Hospital with my family after mishaps. And I've always tried to embrace the spirit of the region and live life to its fullest. But I also know what it's like to be stuck on the sidelines sometimes. You know, this isn't obvious looking at me now, but I actually have a genetic bone disease that caused me to have a lot of broken bones as a kid. And sometimes everybody would be out swimming and I'd be that person stuck inside looking through the window watching them. Or even forced to sit on the sidelines while everyone else plays soccer. And if you know anything about Roseville, you know that every kid plays soccer there, except me. And that experience of not always being able to do everything that everyone else can, it made me really determined. You know, it made me see that everybody's got their strength, everybody's got their contribution, and it made me very determined to always look for the contribution that I can make, and to look for those opportunities when I can step off the sidelines and step up and do something important. And that's why I'm running for Congress right now. I think this is an important election coming up like none other. You know, this region deserves a real voice in Washington, someone who's going to fight for our practical needs and actually advocate for us, unlike Tom McClintock. And that's my commitment to you. I'm running to fight for affordable health care, to fight for jobs, to grow our local economy, to stand up for public education at every level, from preschool to higher education, and to stand up for our environment and our great outdoors, which is so closely linked to our economy, our small businesses, and our way of life here. You know, after high school in Roseville, I was able to go off to college. I went to Stanford and I graduated shortly after 9/11. And that was another time when I saw an opportunity to step up and serve. And so I joined the Foreign Service straight away after college. I became a diplomat. I worked on border security in DC and in Latin America because I speak Spanish very well. And then I went back to school, got a PhD, and became a university professor. But I've actually stepped away from that all right now because this is the contribution that I feel I can make with your help. And I'm really proud to say we've got more than 300 people working on our campaign. I'm so sorry. Wow. Can I turn this off? I'll give this back to you. We're going to try to turn that off. I just wanted to urge you to join our campaign.
All right. Maybe if we just use one, we'll be okay. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be they need to hear from you. So I'm going to use my big girl voice. And we'll just pass that around. Let's see if we can.
Remember, should you turn the other one off? Is that one?
Turned off. Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'll put my, okay. So, our first issue question is the topic of immigration. Steve?
Yeah.
Okay, Steve is going to come and ask the question.
The question is, what changes do you think could be made to improve our current immigration and naturalization system to allow for equal and safe entry into the USA?
Do you need that question repeated, or are you okay? Okay, are you all right? Regina, you had your first up. You have 2.5 minutes.
All right, thank you so much. So if I were elected to Congress, I would actually be the only person in Congress with firsthand experience in our immigration system. When I worked for the State Department, I was actually a vice consul, and that meant that I was issuing and denying visas by the thousands. When I was working at the U.S. Embassy in Guatemala City, I oversaw our fraud prevention unit there that investigated visa fraud. And you know, I've had a bit of contact through that with the immigrant visa system as well. Back here in the U.S., my husband is an immigrant. We did the naturalization process with him, in fact. And I've been a Spanish-English interpreter working with our Spanish-speaking communities here in the U.S. for more than 10 years. So I've seen a lot of different sides of this issue, and this is an area where I think I can be a really effective advocate for change in Congress. Because I always tell people the only thing worse than doing your taxes is trying to deal with the immigration system right now. And there's a reason it's so broken. People don't have that firsthand experience. So what specifically do we need to do? I think first, pass a clean DREAM Act at the federal level. I'm absolutely committed to taking action to protect our dreamers. It's good for our economy. They're contributing $71 million a year just to our economy here in District 4. We have about 2,500 young people here who are eligible for the program, who have already been educated in our public schools. And anybody who's against wasteful government spending should see that it makes absolutely no sense to even contemplate spending government resources trying to remove people like that from our country. I think I'm the only person up here actually who's taken the DREAM Act Now challenge, and I actually made a video of myself calling Tom McClintock's office and urging him to pass a clean DREAM Act. So I'm absolutely committed to that. And a clean DREAM Act means one that doesn't have preconditions linked to it, such as, I don't support the idea of saying, for example, let's build a border wall first and then do something about the dreamers. I think they should be dealt with separately. More broadly, I think that we need bipartisan immigration reform. And this is something that has been tried in Congress for years, hasn't gotten anywhere, and that's exactly why we need to be electing people with the experience that I have and a commitment to bipartisanship and compromise. I would support creating a pathway to citizenship for people who are here, who are able to pass background checks, willing to pay fees. We also would need some increased enforcement as part of a grand compromise. And I support creating a functional exit tracking system to keep track of when and where people leave the US, because that's really important for our security and for monitoring who overstays visas. I think it's perfectly reasonable to say to people, your visa's for a particular period of time, please leave when it's up.
Thank you. Jessica, your response, 1.5 minutes, please.
Okay, I'll make it quick. I am incredibly committed to supporting our dreamers. We have over 800,000 dreamers in the US who are registered, who have stepped up, put themselves on the line, and these are kids that we have invested in, who are contributing back to our country and our society. 40,000 of these kids have started businesses, and they are employing Americans. So we need to make sure we pass a clean DREAM Act. We need to also ensure that we have a clear path to citizenship. We need to make sure that people who come here can come here legally and have a simplified and streamlined immigration system that doesn't take decades, that doesn't cost tens of thousands of dollars in lawyers. Because when we have people who are here illegally, the ones who are the most vulnerable are those who are here illegally. They can be very easily taken advantage of. They're put in the underground economy, and they are contributing to our economy, and we need to be able to give them a path to citizenship so that we can count their contributions and that we can have them be above board and supporting our entire economy. Now the question is, how do we get there? And I am someone who always looks at political strategy. I spent my entire career in national security strategy. We have to be able to debunk this theory that somehow immigrants are taking our jobs. And the way we do that is expand job creation. If you have jobs and employment for everybody, you're not going to be able to have this xenophobic rhetoric have any fire behind it anymore. So we need a clear strategy to get there, and I completely support our dreamers and clear path to citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Rosa.
Well, as a refugee, I think I've seen the good, the bad, and the really ugly of our immigration system, not just with myself, but with my extended family, my family. I still have members of my family who've been here for over 25 years, who are renewing every single 2 years, their workers' visa while they're here, and fighting it through the Ninth Circuit courts, just to make sure that they are allowed a path towards citizenship. The way that we were allowed in here was through political asylum, which back then had a lot of specific things that you had to meet. One of them was that the person applying had to have worked for the military government where they were coming from. So when I hear someone who says that they were denying visas, I know that so many people in my family were also denied visas, and they actually had to take extensive measures and immigrate to the United States illegally, crossing the border, crossing Guatemala, and crossing Mexico on foot. So what I see today is this gross display of our elected officials who loathe immigrants to no extent. And if any of you recall, at a town hall in El Dorado Hills, it was McClintock who told one of the Dreamers to go back to her country and migrate to the US the right way. Well, Doris, who I was one of the co-founders for California Dreamers with, is from El Salvador. And the policies that were there when I came to the US are no longer there. So what I want to make sure is that, number one, we take care of the 11.4 million undocumented immigrants in the United States right now before we start talking about increasing our quotas and increasing any other visa programs of entry right now.
Thank you. Okay, our next question deals with the topic of environment and climate change, and Trish is going to be asking that question.
Hi, so nice to have you guys, or you girls and ladies here. I'm a member of the Tahoe Citizens Climate Action Network, and our question for you is, if elected, what will you do about climate change? And we are interested in both your approach to reducing greenhouse gas emissions locally and nationally, and also your approach to building community and ecosystem resilience in the face of threats due to our rapidly changing climate. So again, that's if elected, what would you do about climate change?
Okay. The first one out of the block with 2.5 minutes will be Rosa.
I need the time. So, I'm a geoscientist. My educational background is in geographic sciences and anything that has to do with the earth. And what I do want to make sure is that everybody here understands how important it is for us to stand up against Trump and McClintock and Scott Pruitt and make sure that we pass effective environmental protections that are not only on paper but enforced. Because of my background and my work experience, I have been able to actually travel to North Dakota and to Montana in the Bakken and drill oil. I was there initially to do research to map the demographics as they were changing, but one of the things I noticed quickly when I was hired on the rig side, being the only female out of a group of 100 men, is that there was no oversight at all. OSHA, the EPA, anything that had to do with safety violations was overlooked and ignored. So for those reasons, I support a carbon tax to make sure that those who are emitting are the ones who are paying. And it cannot be a very small fee. It has to be big enough that it's a deterrent, an economic deterrent for them. That if they're creating these emissions, that they're actually going to be deterred by how large the fees are, that eventually over time it will take us into actually push those companies in oil right now into renewable energies. Well, they'll see more of a benefit. And the way they'll see this benefit is because we're going to be providing subsidies, incentives, not just for the companies that are out there now, but also for new businesses to start and grow. I do not support calling a ban on all fracking immediately. I do support it in some regions because of the way that it affects the soil right now and how it causes induced seismic activity. But I think over time I want to make sure that we get there, but we have to ensure that we are in a place where we will be secure and that we won't be dependent on imports from elsewhere either. And those are the few things that I would start with and when it comes to environmental policy. The other one, of course, is going back to earlier this year when Trump said he was going to pull out of the Paris Accord and making sure that we stay within the Paris Agreement when our time comes to leave in 2020, and that we actually make, I don't want to take too much time, but essentially enforce the program and the relationships that we currently have.
Regina, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. So I've actually taught scientific research methods at the university level and trained PhD students in how to do research. So I get the science and I get the urgency. I mean, I really understand that climate change here is not just a matter of environmentalism. It's about the economy and it's about our well-being. So there are specific things I would do. I'm the only person running who's pledged to join the Climate Solutions Caucus if elected. This is a group that's 50% Republicans, 50% Democrats, and committed to taking action now to lower greenhouse gas emissions and avoid the problems or mitigate the problems that are coming in our future. Specifically, and I am open to sort of pragmatic arguments about this if someone can show me a more effective way to reduce greenhouse emissions. But I like the idea of specifically starting with James Baker's plan. He's a Republican. I think that gives us some good buy-in, again, for working in a bipartisan way. He essentially proposes a carbon tax, carbon dividends going back to American families. Independent analysis suggests that could be around $2,000 a year going back to each household potentially. And then rebates and fees to compensate companies that are importing and exporting from countries with different regulations. I think that's an effective path forward where we could take action. I do disagree with the fourth point in his plan, and I think we need to have a just transition, for example, rather than just repealing the Clean Power Plan, although policies around that are changing rapidly. In terms of local adaptation and mitigation, I'll just say quickly, I think we need to be empowering our scientists, promoting things like community innovation grants, where the federal government can be a partner with local communities who are facing these challenges.
Thank you, Regina. Jessica.
Yes. First of all, congratulations, South Lake Tahoe, for your pledge to go 100% renewable by 2032. Well done. I mean, really amazing. Thank you for being the leaders on this. And this is the model we have to uphold. I love our environment. I love our mountains. Having grown up here, the mountains are like my cathedral. I've hiked 500 miles on the Pacific Crest Trail straight through here, and I understand what an incredible jewel we have. So I'm definitely committed to protecting and supporting it. And Tom McClintock isn't. He tweeted out a congratulations to Trump for pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement because he said we need to support working families. What about the working families here in Tahoe who depend on our $5 billion a year ski industry as the largest employer in our district, and it doesn't fly if it's a 34-degree average low temperature like it was last year? We need to solve this urgently. We are living on the front lines of climate change, whether it is the 120 million bark beetle trees that are dead in our Sierras right now, or the or drought or forest fire coming in and encroaching on us. So what do? We need to turn all of our environmental challenges into economic opportunities. My favorite idea is taking manure from cattle ranches, combining it with chipped bark beetle, turning it into a compost to restore high alpine wetlands and create meadows that sheep graze on that is actually carbon-eating wool is how you can sell it. So there's so many innovative ideas. I'm ready to invest in them. I'm ready to support them. I am ready to be a strong advocate for our environment which sustains us. Thank you.
All right, our next question deals with, says we have rural poverty, economics, and the budget. So Nick has a big opportunity to ask. It has a tough question, I guess, to ask to help us all that.
All right.
So here's Nick.
Especially because I haven't thought of it yet. So as we all understand, the budget going forward is the most important issue, or the most talked about issue now. And there's been a lot of conversation on TV about, who are going to be the winners and who are going to be the losers. Us in a blue state, our taxes will no longer be able to deduct our state and local taxes. So from an economic standpoint, what will be your priorities within the budget system? And then fundamentally, how will you use those policies and priorities to do two things? One, to address rural poverty that is rampant both in Congressional District 4, but all over this country. And then secondly, to address income inequality.
All in 2 minutes.
Nice. Your question.
Okay, we're going to take a little breather to soak in. That's a pretty heavy question here. And Jessica, you're the first one out of
I got it. Okay.
2.5 minutes.
All things budget in 2.5 minutes. Go. So you're lucky in that I am a federal budget expert. I spent several years working for the State Department and USAID on the federal budget, worked with our appropriations committees. So I have a lot of very budget wonky ideas. It's not glamorous work, but it's really useful if you want your advocate in Congress to be able to get funding back here and work the system so that it works effectively. So let me tell you a really budget wonky idea to save us money in the long run. Currently, our federal budget operates in these continuing resolutions, and we get our budget in these little fits and spurts. When I sat down with the head of Yosemite, he said the biggest threat to the park is the federal budget. because they don't get their money until the end of the year, and then they only have 3 weeks to spend it, which means they do not get to actually actively make good, wise decisions with our tax dollars because they're not given the time. We are setting up all of our federal agencies for failure. So first thing we should do, pass a budget. McClintock has never done this since he's been in office. Second thing we should do, have them be 5-year or 3-year appropriations so that our budget funding, when it comes to our agencies, they have 2 or 3 years to actively plan, strategize, and spend it wisely and be good stewards of our tax dollars. Now, how do we apply this into the tax plan that you mentioned, the SALT? Tom McClintock, I had an op-ed in the Sacramento Bee yesterday that you guys should all read. It put Tom McClintock on his heels. It caused him to put forth an amendment that addressed everything in the op-ed we wrote, including, and we really called him out on the impact of not being able to deduct your state income taxes from your federal. That impacts 4 in 10 people in our district at an average price of $5,000 a person, money from your pocket. And the Republicans passed it today. And so we need to hold them accountable. Rural poverty, okay. This is a huge issue that I am actively looking towards. We need to invest, take the challenges in our community, whether it's access to rural broadband so that our community can suddenly become part of the modern era and not be left behind. And we need to be investing in vocational training, like you're doing in South Lake here actually, where our students are being trained for the jobs demanded in the community. Your high school here is a great example where you looked around and said, we've got a lot of skiers, and suddenly the kids are learning sports medicine in high school. This is fantastic. So we're going to make smart and wise investments, and I will be an advocate for our tax dollars so that they're spent wisely.
Rosa, 1.5 minutes.
So as y'all heard the news today, the tax bill passed the House, and what they're proposing, the Republicans are proposing, is a 1.5 trillion tax cuts for the wealthy. Actually, let me rephrase that. It's 1.3 trillion for the wealthy, and the rest is for the other people, 90% of the population. So what's going on is we continue to give corporations huge tax cuts while the majority of the people are continuing to, we are the ones who are they're doing this on our backs essentially. Let me put it that way. The people who make $30,000 a year are going to see their taxes increase by 2021. Who makes $30,000 a year in the United States? It's over 50% of our population. Yeah. So it's a big deal, and I think that we really have to address this in many different levels. One of them is we saw the recession hit, we saw how we pulled Wall Street out of trouble, and Wall Street has recovered, but we haven't. In fact, for the average American, we've actually seen our wages go down 1.7% since the recession hit. So we haven't recovered at all. So I think it's due time that Wall Street does pay us back, and the way they're going to pay us back is by making college tuition free and vocational programs. In this area, in El Dorado County, the biggest industries are tourism, the service industry, and education. And if we were able to invest in the housing shortages, then we would be able to invest in the top 5 industries within California, which is all in vocational and labor programs. So that would be one of my ways to.
Thank you, Regina.
Rosa.
Sorry. Regina, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. So it is sometimes a little tricky to tell us apart, but I would actually encourage you to go look up the op-ed that I also had in the Sac Bee yesterday, and you can really read the 2 columns side by side and compare them. And what I was trying to say there and still feel is that McClintock for days was leading up to the fact that he was going to vote no on the tax bill when it came out today, and he did. But the reasons and the justification he gave for voting no are also really bad and really problematic. I mean, in doing so, he continued to support massive corporate tax cuts without making any turn toward actually investing in our people. So that's the point that I was trying to make in the op-ed. Saying that if you want to know where my priorities lie, If we want to spur economic growth, I think it's clear that we don't need to be returning more money to the hands of corporations. We need to be investing in the American people and in the people here in our district. And in both the budget that's been proposed and the tax bill that are out right now, both pose real threats there. The things that are on the line right now, they're proposing cuts to job training programs, even for veterans. They're proposing to freeze Pell Grants. So the value of a Pell Grant, which is one of our most successful programs to allow lower-income people to go to college, would erode over time, especially in high-cost states like California. There's so many other areas where we need to be investing. Rural broadband, I completely agree with empowering local entrepreneurs to be able to join the modern economy. Community development block grants are really critical to so many of the organizations that provide crucial services in our communities. McClintock rails against them. The last thing I'll say really quickly is that the Farm Bill is also up next year, and if we care about rural poverty, many of those programs are actually funded through the Farm Bill, so we need to have our eyes on that.
Thank you, Regina. We pause now for a quick commercial break. If any of you have an empty chair next to you, could you please raise your hand? Allison, do you want to direct some people? Those of you who are standing, we have some seats for you. There's some empty seats over here.
One up front, answer your question. Okay.
And I'm just gonna, can you hear us okay? Everything, no? Okay. Because we've turned off the mic, so that might work for you, okay, if you want to.
Yeah, the technician tweaked it, so it should be working.
So it should work, so let's go ahead and turn that on. All right. Moving on to a topic that really isn't important to anybody, but we thought we would just throw it in, healthcare. You guys, you know, I'm really bad because I didn't even get a laugh out of that.
You said be quiet.
So, please come on.
David.
David's going to ask that question.
Well, thanks for showing up here, ladies. It's pretty fun to meet you guys. My name's David Schlosser. I own the little general store in Strawberry, right over the hill here.
Oh.
And my nickname's Squirrel, so most people know me as Squirrel. But for my whole adult life, I've always been self-employed since 21 years old. And it's always a challenge for self-employed people to deal with that stuff, as you know. Prior to covered California, super high deductibles is the only thing we could afford. And now, you know, I have a family of 4, 3 of us have pre-existing conditions, so that's a challenge. So I'm gonna get to the question here. I would like to hear the candidates' proposals towards how they intend to pursue health care. Is Obamacare to be fixed? Or will a single payer system be our new path, or expanding Medicare?
Regina.
Yeah, so being someone with a really significant pre-existing condition myself, and one that affects multiple family members, I mean, I really understand, I hope, your question. And I myself remember, you know, before the Affordable Care Act, if you were under 26 and you were briefly in between jobs, or in my case, in between a job and going back to grad school 6 weeks later, you couldn't just go on your parents' insurance, even if they were lucky enough to have insurance. So I have shopped for individual insurance as a person with major pre-existing conditions. And I mean, I remember being horrified at the exclusions and the cost and the lack of value. I think if I remember correctly, my entire bones, my musculoskeletal system, were excluded from my insurance or something, and that was the only thing I could get for a short period of time. Wow. And that's a big part of why I'm absolutely committed to fighting to protect and defend the Affordable Care Act. It's cut the uninsurance rate in half in our district. It has actually done a lot to support our rural public schools, because they get some of their funding that they need, especially in the face of declining enrollments, through Medi-Cal for providing services there on site that helps them meet their overhead. And it's done a lot to protect all of us. Even people with employer-sponsored insurance now have caps on the amount of money that you can be charged per year, absolute out-of-pocket maximum caps per year. That also really helped our family when we had twins who could have been very medically complicated. But for the Affordable Care Act, we could have been facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in out-of-pocket expenses, just for the good or bad luck, depending on how you look at it, of having twins. So, the question to me is, how do we do the most good for the most people in the shortest amount of time in a really realistic, pragmatic way at the federal level? I think that healthcare is a right, I think it's a necessity, but in my mind, the best thing that we can do for people, realistically and concretely, is save the Affordable Care Act. If we look away for a second, it's under new attacks just about every single day. Improve it. Stabilize the individual markets by legislating to guarantee that the cost-sharing reduction payments that are supposed to go to insurance companies actually go to them. Ensure that we are not further destabilizing and sabotaging our insurance markets. That's a big part of what's driving up premiums. Then once we do that, we work on both providing more support to people who are self-employed and small business owners, and we work on bringing down costs, starting with prescription drug costs. That's an area where there's also a good amount of bipartisan agreement in Congress, and we can take action now, soon. After that, I would work toward working on expanding coverage, perhaps by adding a public option to functioning marketplaces.
Thank you. Rosa.
Let me just start off by saying that healthier Americans make for a healthier economy and a better America. I believe that healthcare right now is a human right. And I think it's a damn shame that we don't have universal health care like many of the other developed nations. I support HR 676, and I also support Bernie's bill with the 4-year plan because I support Medicare expansion for all. And the way that we're going to be able to do this is we're going to be able to remove the high deductions because so many people right now are underinsured or uninsured. And I'll let you in on a secret. As a small business owner right now, I'm uninsured, because I'm running for Congress and I've taken this on full time and I can't afford to continue paying even my affordable health care because it's not affordable. Access is simply not enough. We all have access to golf clubs, we have country clubs, we have Lamborghinis, but it does not mean that we can't afford it. So what does that leave people with? It leaves people with debt. It leaves people with not going to the regular doctor all the time, and that cost when they go to the ER finally is passed on to us. And if it's not passed on to us that way, then it's passed on to us through GoFundMe accounts. Because believe me, I see at least 5 of those on my Facebook a week, and it usually has to do with healthcare. So I believe in healthcare expansion for all, and it needs to happen now. But hopefully within the next 4 years, I'll be in Congress making sure that we implement a great program that won't outdo our spending.
Thank you, Rosa. Jessica.
I support a single payer model, and I think we need to get there. And here's the strategy of how we get there. First of all, we have to recognize that our healthcare system is fundamentally flawed. It's not like any other market. You don't walk into the grocery store and get your milk and eggs and cheese and come home and get a bill for $2,000 2 months later and say, "Ugh, if I hadn't gotten out-of-network milk." The system is broken, and therefore we need a smart strategy to get there. And you know what the strategy isn't? It isn't having our employers pay for healthcare. Why are they paying for healthcare? They should just be employing and paying for jobs. Our country should be investing in the well-being and health of its citizens. This is basic. Now, we will get pushback where people say, "But Jessica, how are you going to pay for it?" And we all want to make sure that we answer that question accurately. We don't want to have our healthcare be this exacerbating our national debt and making us vulnerable to countries like China who own our national debt. So, how do we pay for it? The first step is healthcare transparency laws. Healthcare transparency laws, just like California just passed in the pharmaceutical industry, where we can open up the books and see what is driving up the price of pharmaceuticals. We can apply this to hospitals as well to see that the hospital prices are being driven up by people coming in without insurance, and that cost is getting transferred throughout the system. So we get rid of the middleman, and the studies prove that we can actually get twice the service for half the price. So that's what we need. Thanks.
He certainly is. So our next issue is in the area of education. Jody's going to ask the question.
Good evening. Thank you for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. This is a great opportunity for our community. As an educator, I have several concerns with Tom McClintock when it comes to advocating for all of our students despite their families' income levels, race, religion, and immigration status. Please explain your positions on private charters and what will you do to ensure appropriate funding for our California public schools, which now rank about 45th in the nation. In addition, please share your thoughts on educating and attracting new teachers in light of the shortage of teachers in California.
Do you need that question repeated? I would. All right, you guys lighten up. Okay, Jessica, you get 2.5 minutes.
Okay. I am the proud daughter of 2 public school teachers. And so I grew up seeing how incredibly hard teachers work and their dedication to their jobs, and yet how little their pay is. Our teachers should be as valued as our doctors because they are as critical to the health of our society. I am also the product of an incredibly high quality, amazing public education. Even though the ceiling tiles were falling down in the classroom, I had amazing teachers myself. My mom scoured the school system to drive us 30 minutes every day to make sure that we could get to the best school possible and have the best education. And as a result, it launched me into an incredible career. And that was my foundation and that was my gift. But every student deserves that quality of education. And we keep trying to come up with these different formats and different forms, but what we need to be doing is investing in our public schools. Our public school teachers need to have competitive salaries that are at least 6 figures so that we can retain the best talent and we can pay them for the quality of work that they are doing. We need to ensure that our school facilities have the best resources so that our students are trained not only for the education that, for basic education, but also for the skill sets that they need around them, like investing in vocational training, like outdoor education. I actually used to teach outdoor education right out of college and understand the value of having our kids understand things hands-on. We also need to ensure that we are investing in early childhood education. Working overseas in foreign aid, as I did for a few years, I saw that the best indicator of a country's success is the quality of education and tools that a child has for its first 1,000 days. That's up to about age 5, I believe. And so investing in pre-K education so that every kid gets developed and gets invested in at this early stage, because that is an investment that lasts a lifetime. So I'm incredibly committed to ensuring that our public schools are the envy of the world, because we as a country have the resources to do it, and that is our standard, and that's an investment that will pay dividends down the line. Thank you.
Rosa, you're next with 1.5 minutes.
Well, I'm a mother of a 12-year-old, and I've gone through the public system, through a failing school, and then to a charter who promised me the sky and the moon and the stars. And then I went back to the public school system, but I got a little bit more creative. Because right now I live in Granite Bay, which offers one of the best educations in Placer County, and even through California and our nation, competitively. The way that we got there, in a place where the average house costs about $600,000, is because we bought a $30,000 trailer in the only trailer park in Granite Bay. Yeah, because right now the way that our school model is that your child's opportunities and future successes are dictated by the zip code that they're born into. Yeah. And so I really want to make sure that every single child is provided those resources. So I really will advocate for equity within our K-12 system, and the way that we will do this is providing grants. We saw how it worked with No Child Left Behind, regardless of how bad that program was designed, but states adopted it. And that's one of the things that I really want to see. And I want to make another thing very clear. Public funds should never be used to create a competitive market for charter schools, for religious purpose schools, or private schools that really challenge our public school system. We have to defend our public school system and tell Betsy DeVos that unless we provide the resources for the two basic things in a school system, which is the teacher and the student, we will never get back to that innovative nation that we once were.
Thank you, Rosa. Regina. 1.5 minutes.
All right, so I'm the proud product of our public schools here in our district, and my campaign literally exists because of one of my former high school teachers. He is the person who encouraged me to run for Congress. So I'm really committed to the idea that teachers are the backbone of our community. We should be valuing them. We should be paying them more. All of our schools should have sufficient funding to offer an excellent education to our kids. But the question is, how do we get there and what's going wrong right now? Unfortunately, the state of California is a big part of the problem. As we were saying, I mean, depending what numbers we're looking at, the number I'd had was that we were 41st in the country in per pupil funding at the state level. I think we're around 45th in our student-teacher ratio right now. And that's unacceptable, especially in a state with such wealth in the Bay Area and in Los Angeles. That's why we need good candidates running at the state level, too. But what can we do at the federal level to help mitigate that and help do our part? I think we look for every possible way to support our schools. I'm in favor of the federal government meeting its obligations to fund special education programs. Right now, they're only meeting about half of that obligation, and that burden, that missing part of the budget, affects school districts broadly. It affects teacher salaries and other programs they can't fund. I do not support private charters, which can drain resources out of our public school system. And I think that we need to think broadly in society about ensuring people have access to mental health care outside of schools, supporting families, because that provides students with the healthy and strong foundation to succeed in school and help our teachers work more efficiently.
Thank you, Regina. And now to our final question of this segment. And each of the candidates will have 2 minutes to respond. And Rachel has that question.
So it's no secret or surprise to anybody in this room that this district is going to be tough to flip, right? That's nobody's in denial about that. Is there okay, it's no secret that this...
Here, try this.
Is this working? Okay. So it's no secret that this district is going to be tough to flip. This is not going to be an easy campaign. I think on everybody's mind in this room has to be the question of what is your plan for flipping this district? How are you going to capitalize on the momentum that we're seeing on the left and at the same time win over the more moderate or more conservative voters in this district?
Okay, first one out of the gate is Rosa.
Okay. So there are multiple ways to win this district. Number one, I'll start by saying that I'm a community organizer, so I know how to organize. I know how to get people excited. I know how to get people going. I know how to talk to them in a way that the issues at hand are at their forefront and they know that their lives are on the line if they don't act today. So I've been endorsed by Justice Democrats, Brand New Congress, the California Latina Democrats of Fresno County, and by the Free Thought Equality Fund. So every single one of those plays a very important role. Number one, with Justice Democrats, we gotta get money out of politics. That is the number 3 issue throughout this entire district after a poll that was conducted by Sarah Forward. Everybody wants money out of politics, including this very red district with that guy who's in charge right now. The second endorsement is from Brand New Congress. And what we are trying to talk about is a working Congress, which has been absent from our capital for over 30 years now. And we actually have an entire slate of progressive, independent, and even Republicans on this same slate. And we are all working on progressive issues, which include income inequality, which include creating a living wage, which includes strengthening our labor unions, K-12 systems, higher education, all of those things together. And of course, another one is the California Latina Democrats, which have the largest number of delegates in this district. For two reasons, this is very important. Number one, we have 12% Latinos in this district who hardly get out to vote. 7% of them are not even registered to vote. So that's one of the ways that we are going to be able to waken up that base. Number one, I am the only Latina running in this district, the only Latina who's ever ran in this district, I think the only person of color who's ever ran to represent this district. So it's a big deal. The second one, the second important part of that is that now we have an entire workforce down south, but also we have a delegate count that's really going to get us that good support from the DCCC, who just announced support for this district.
Regina.
All right, so to win in this district, we need to have a strong grassroots campaign, and I'm proud that there are around 315 or 320 volunteers working on our campaign already, building out that network. We also need to do a serious, credible job of fundraising, which we've been doing very successfully through a grassroots model. But that's not enough. We need both a strategy and a way of appealing broadly across the district. In terms of the strategy, I think our path forward is to try to get endorsed as the Democratic Party's candidate in January or February of this year, start the general election then, in February essentially, turn outward, get field organizers going for our campaign, and no offense to groups like this, but start visiting other folks who maybe aren't allies already, start visiting chambers of commerce, farm bureaus, reaching out to the people that we need. And then essentially use the June election as the first round of the general election to show that we can actually get more votes than McClintock in June and make this district really competitive going into November. How am I going about reaching out to folks who are no party preference and Republicans? By thinking carefully about both issues and identities. In terms of issues, I'm absolutely committed to fighting for the practical, pragmatic needs of people here in the district. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. Nobody wants to breathe in smog. Nobody wants our rivers to be more polluted so you can't even go fishing in them safely. Nobody wants to see our public schools having their funding cut or important scholarships like the lifelong learning credit under attack. So I'm focused on those tangible, practical issues in my campaign. In terms of identities, I think it's really important that we say to people, it's fine if someone's a Republican. Let's talk about what they value about that. What makes them feel good and positive about being a Republican? That's the conversation I like to have. And then to show that if they value hard work, if they value freedom and independence, if they value, empowering people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps or empowering local small businesses, that's what my campaign is actually all about. And I try to appeal to them also through their sense of regional and civic pride to try to do what's best for their region in this one particular election. Thank you.
Jessica.
So I come from a very large, very rural, very Republican family in our district. So I have at least 100 Republicans on board, and gosh darn it, I earned those votes. But I have been messaging to Republicans my entire life. And I understand how to reach out to these folks because they are my people. This is my family. These are my relatives who I love and adore. And so I started out by doing a listening tour of our district. I went to all 10 counties, met with local mayors, supervisors, hospital boards, and fire chiefs to make sure that I understood the real issues that our community was facing so that I didn't have to talk about issues that sound like Republicans or Democrats, that we could cause people to refocus and start looking at each other and looking at this campaign through a community lens and a problem-solving lens. And going in, forest fires don't ask whether you are a Republican or a Democrat before it comes into your neighborhood. We have to start looking at these problems as a community rather than as a political party. And that's a huge difference from Tom McClintock, who only looks through a partisan lens. I've been really working to make sure that we can start getting the message out to demonstrate that he is doing nothing for our community and actively harming us. So how do we get that message out? It requires resources. There is no path to victory in this district unless we can raise the resources to out-message and match McClintock. The DCCC told me that they wouldn't take any candidate seriously unless you can raise $250,000 in your first quarter out. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And I raised $268,000. And that came from over 1,000 individual contributions, 100 of which were Republicans, and we actually outraised Tom McClintock. And then guess what? The DCCC, true to their word, came through for us. They wrote to me last week and said, hey, make the case for the district, and I did, and we made it on the national map. So we need these professional national resources to be able to match Tom McClintock and the Koch brothers, and it requires all of you also investing in the campaign and making this happen. And I am proud to be running a campaign that inspires rather than divides. Thank you.
Let's give all our candidates a big round.
Okay, thank you for all your questions. Let's get to it. All right, so we have 1 minute each. We're trying to get to as many audience questions as possible, so I'll try to stick to that, and because everyone wants to hear what you have to say about what they care about. So, first one. Living in South Lake Tahoe for 25 years, I have struggled to get my education and find a good job, even as a journalist. I've never made more than $20,000 a year. How can we make a livable wage a reality in this rural district?
Rosa, you go first.
Okay. I support a living wage. I'm supporting right now the Fight for 15, which started here, but that fight was started in 2012, and it's now 2017, and by the time it's even implemented in just California, it'll be 2020, which I think it's too little, too late. I support an actual living wage depending on the region where you live in, especially because of cost of living. It's so expensive. We are creating this immense imbalance between the top earners and then the rest of the American people, and I think that needs to stop right now. So to do this, I really do believe in strengthening our unions, in strengthening our ability to negotiate our wages, and I support making sure that, number one, we have those type of jobs in rural regions that actually provide those type of incomes. And I am going to try to make sure that we bring high-tech, high-paying jobs into many of the rural regions where a salary of $20,000 will be a thing of the past.
Thank you. Regina.
All right, so I'm going to grab the microphone.
Is this one working? No? Okay. That's all right. We were just requested to try to use it by someone.
Use that.
Okay. Yeah, someone who was having a bit of difficulty hearing requested that we try to use the microphone, so I think we'll try to do that. All right, so this is really a critical issue. And again, I think we need to do two things. We need to protect and improve those programs that are already really important for folks who, to support working families. So the Earned Income Tax Credit, for example, is really successful. I would be in favor of expanding that. Protecting things like SNAP, our critical nutritional assistance programs. We can't have those programs on the chopping block. And again, so much of the peripheral support and the community-based support that comes through community development block grants that Tom McClintock calls an absolute waste of federal dollars. I don't agree at all. But how do we bring also higher paying jobs and really invest in growing the economy here? I think we make smart investments in infrastructure in this region. We've got somebody right now who only knows one word, and that's no. It doesn't matter how much something would benefit this region, how important it is. He says no, no, no. No to highway funding. He's actually voted twice against federal funding for expanding rural broadband also. I think we need to create an infrastructure here that's business friendly and that also allows people to be engaged with the modern economy, to pick up additional part-time work, and to engage in additional training that they might need to get those higher paying jobs.
Jessica.
We need to really consciously and strategically jumpstart our economy here. That starts with access to vocational training and investment in basic rural broadband so that we can actually rejoin the modern economy. We've already talked about broadband, so with vocational training, we need to start looking at the job opportunities that are needed here. How do we turn our environmental challenges into multi-layers of jobs? How do we get green jobs going that are going to be investing in areas like biomass for our beetle kill, or taking, or solar or wind? Our different areas of renewable energy need to have a solid investment, and that will create jobs along with it. We also need to ensure that we are giving our students the best chance going forward, and we need to and for our journalist friend who asked the question, I'd say that actually an investment in journalism as a priority for our country, it's highly needed now. We need to start funding it better.
Oh, it is working, okay. Many rural voters are strongly pro-gun, but mass shootings are increasing and we're all at risk. How will you address gun violence in Congress? Where do you think you can find common ground with Republicans and independents on this issue? Anna, who's first?
Jessica first. Right.
So having grown up in a rural Northern California family, I go duck hunting and pheasant hunting with my dad. And that is just part of kind of our family and what we've always done. They're free-range pheasants, just so you're clear. And so I have actually been talking to a lot of hunters, about gun safety and gun safety strategies. And what's really interesting is that I am able to bridge that divide because of my background. No one's gonna look at me and say, but you're gonna take away our guns and then end the conversation. Instead, we've been sitting down having open conversations about the standards of gun safety that responsible hunters and sportsmen apply in their homes here in California. We talk about the standards that California already has in terms of 2-week waiting periods, background checks. We say you wouldn't hand your gun to somebody who beats their wife, so why should the government? And they say, oh yeah, that makes sense. And so saying, well, could we expand some of these standards that we have in California across the country? Turns out California gun owners say yes.
Okay, Rosa.
This is a little bit awkward. It's like a tiny mic. So I've actually been traveling through this district already and knocking on doors and having that conversation the minute that they see me. One of the first questions is, are you going to take my guns away? What do you think about the Second Amendment? And my claim to fame in this area is that I've been able to speak to the state of Jefferson and the Tea Party alike and have real conversations about the Second Amendment in our Constitution. So I do believe in the Constitution. I believe in the Second Amendment. I do believe that we are misinterpreting the words of our Second Amendment. And I do believe that there are just a few exceptions for guns that people maybe should be able to own. The rest, like ARs, they're not needed, period. The other thing is we have to expand our background checks because what we saw just this last time in Texas is that our system failed us not once, not twice, but 3 times. And I think background checks should extend not to just the person who's going to purchase it, but the family in that same household.
Regina.
So I think it's really important to start by praising the culture of responsible gun ownership here in our district. A lot of perfectly great, wonderful, responsible people own firearms. That's an important part of their history and their families, their hobbies, and that's perfectly fine. You're probably going to leave here tonight. You're going to tell some of your friends and neighbors that you came out, and they're going to say, what? You heard from 3 lady Democrats all night? They're just going to come take my guns. So I need you all to repeat after me. They're not going to come take your guns. So they're going to look at any one of us, and that's going to be the misinformation that's going to be spread. Here's the truth. Regulations in California are already much stricter than at the federal level. There's a lot that we can do at the federal level that's really important that's not going to affect the experience of owning a gun here in our district. Here's what I would support as a first priority. Enforce our existing laws effectively and work for universal background checks at the federal level. More than 90% of Americans support this, including 74% of NRA members. It just makes sense that we shouldn't be putting guns into the hands of violent criminals, domestic abusers, and others who are likely to use those weapons to harm others. No responsible gun owner would agree with that.
Okay, next question. What are the most important ways that you will stand up for women and families in Congress?
Regina.
All right, well, believe it or not, since California became a state, this region has never been represented by a woman in Congress, ever. And I think we've got a really good chance of changing that next year. Do you guys agree? All right, but, and I think being a role model is important. I mean, this is part of what motivated me to run. The town hall meeting that happened after my high school teacher tried to get me to do this was what pushed me over the edge. And there was a 12-year-old girl there who stood up and asked Tom McClintock. She said, you know, during the campaign, you supported Trump and you apologized for his behavior, his disrespect toward women. What are you going to do to protect my rights and dignity as a young woman? And McClintock essentially didn't have an answer for her. He just repeated that same fact. So here's the things we do need to be fighting for concretely. Equal pay for equal work. Access and the ability and the freedom to make our own healthcare choices and to make the choices that are best for our families. Access to education and a safe educational and work environment where we're free from harassment and intimidation.
Rosa.
Well, for starters, I'm going to start with the wage gap because that is one of the things that affects so many things. In the United States right now, about 2/3 of every household with children under 18, the woman is the main earner, the breadwinner. But our wages are not comparable to our white male counterparts. In fact, even in this wonderful state of California, which is a little bit more progressive than the rest of our nation, Latinas still make 43 cents to the dollar. Women of color, black women, make about 54 cents, and white women make about 76 cents to that dollar. So we have a long way to go. And in fact, I always make a joke about how about we just make men come back down to our level, and then let's see how they like it. Let's see what equal wages means to them then. But the way that I want to approach this is because it affects families, it affects American values. Not valuing women for who they are and paying them a fair wage limits us to make better choices economically for our families. It limits us to make better reproductive choices and planning and family planning. And so that is where we start, is closing that wage gap.
Jessica.
How I'm going to help women? I'm going to get elected. You know, we have only 20% of Congress is currently represented by women, and it's roughly 20% for most elected bodies in the U.S. When women represent 50.8% of the population, this is not acceptable. This is not a representative democracy. And so we are actively working to change that so that women can have a seat at the table. You know, I spent 10 years in the field of national security, and I was often the youngest in the room and the only woman at the table. And people sometimes look at me and say, Jessica, how can you as a 35-year-old woman stand up to these guys when you get to Congress? And the answer is, I've been doing it my whole life. I am used to getting things through when men are sort of set against it and being able to hold my ground and hold our ground for our community. So I of course agree with everything that's been put out tonight. And I'd say the one thing I'm going to add is that we need to make the workplace family friendly. We have 2 breadwinners. We need to make sure that the workplace actually reflects the workforce so that women can go on maternity leave, have that covered, be able to come back and pick up their careers and keep moving forward and contributing all of their talents to our leadership in our country.
Okay, next question. What are the biggest issues and concerns facing our Sierra communities and lands, and those that resonate with the broadest spectrum of people in our district? And how will you address those issues in Congress?
Rosa.
You said land?
Land, Sierra communities and lands. Lands, L-A-N-D-S, lands.
Do you need the question repeated or anything?
Yeah.
So what are the biggest issues facing our Sierra communities and lands? And we had in mind those that are a shared concern among people of all political stripes. You know, what are kind of issues of common ground in our district that are shared by a lot of people, and how will you address those issues in Congress is the question.
So one of the things that I've always said, raise your hand in the back if you cannot hear me, because I don't like holding that little tiny thing. One of the things that I've always talked about is our fires and fire prevention here within this district and all of California, really. Because I do work in environmental sciences, I'm a geoscientist, I'm out there geotagging a lot of the dead trees right now that have been affected by the bark beetle infestation. So one of the things that I've always said over and over again is that fire, when it comes to your house, it's not going to turn left or right because your house is a Republican home or your house is a Democratic home, and it's going to burn it equally. And we have to address not only that, but the fact that right now we are going through a housing shortage in many of these areas that have been affected. We have to tackle insurance companies who have gotten away with murder by finding loopholes to not fund people and give them their benefits after they lose their homes. And we have to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to have those trees right now taken down with the aid of our federal government, which has become extremely costly for some areas, from $3,000 to $10,000 a tree, and that is not okay.
Regina.
So I'll highlight 3 things. I'll also start with fires and fire prevention. You know, right now it's egregious that we've got a representative in Congress who's actually blocking common sense, bipartisan legislation that would protect federal dollars for funding fire prevention. And Tom McClintock will not let this legislation move forward. Instead, he's got his own more extreme alternative, which you will not be surprised to hear features a lot of logging and very little environmental reviews. You know, we know that we can't log our way out of fire danger. We need to be doing things that are based on science and smart land management and funding fire prevention and protecting that funding so it's not stolen to fight fires when they go over budget, which is what happens right now. So I would absolutely fight to protect that fire prevention funding. I also think we need to ensure people can access fire insurance. That's becoming an increasing problem for folks, especially if they need to sell their houses or move and the new buyer can't even get insurance. I'll highlight the tree mortality crisis. I absolutely think that we need to be investing at the federal level to help folks get those trees off their property, put some of our unemployed loggers and sawmill operators back to work, and simultaneously reduce the fire danger in our district.
Jessica.
I was down volunteering with the victims of the Detweiler fire earlier this year, and I saw that everyone coming into that center who had lost their home or lost all of their food because they had been evacuated for 2 weeks, none of them saw themselves as a Republican or a Democrat. They all saw themselves as members of a community actively bonding together to be able to solve the problems that faced us as a community. And this is the standard our campaign is having going forward. So let me talk about forest fire for a little bit. You know, forest fire isn't just a natural disaster, right? This is a political disaster. This is a series of bad policy decisions that have been building up for over a century. You know, with the Comstock lode clear-cutting our old growth forest without, with Smokey the Bear policy promoting fire suppression rather than fire prevention, we now are at a point where our forests are tinderboxes waiting, causing a significant danger for us. We need to invest in fire breaks and fuel breaks. We need to invest in a forest to fire model where we get the Bay Area communities that use our watersheds up here investing in fire prevention because it impacts them equally. We need all the stakeholders of our entire region invested in fire prevention, and I'm committed to doing that.
Okay, next question. How do you propose to remove tobacco, oil, Wall Street, and other big corporate money from politics and government? Who's first?
Jessica.
Well, I can start by saying I will not be taking any of those funds, so it will be removed from my politics. And the way to get there, to get big money and corporate special interests out of politics, is to change Citizens United. You know, we will need actually a constitutional amendment at this point to be able to change that. I am very committed to campaign finance reform on multiple levels, but changing Citizens United so that Tom McClintock can't call up the Koch brothers and get them to drop a couple $1 million into a PAC, is something that needs to fundamentally change so that our grassroots voices are heard loud and clear. Because a corporation is not a citizen. I am sorry. And so we need a constitutional amendment to do that. I love some models also with other areas of campaign finance reform. There's some great ideas proposed, such as one of my favorites is every citizen gets $50 to invest in any campaign. You can put $1 in 50 campaigns. You can put it all into one campaign, and that is the only money that candidate can take. So you have to have the voters invested and on board to run your campaign.
Regina. Wow.
All right, so I also am not taking contributions from those sources or at this point from any PACs or any outside groups for that matter. Whereas ours is a grassroots campaign. And if you want to get big money out of politics, you have to start by getting the small money in. And I think electing people who are beholden to their constituents, not to outsiders, not to wealthy people, even in other parts of the country, but to you guys. And I'm really proud to say that it's a bit unconventional to actually run your campaign that way, but we've been very successful at doing that and have raised over $200,000 so far with that kind of model. You know, we got started with small online donations through a site called CrowdPack, for example. But specifically, what else can we do, just besides running an ethical campaign ourselves? I think transparency is absolutely critical right now. Of course, I'd support ending Citizens United. That's not entirely within my purview, but we can increase transparency about who's paying for what. That goes for PACs, that goes for special interests, but it also includes things like Russian interference in our elections. I mean, now that we're running a campaign ourselves, I'm constantly shocked by how powerful a tool some of this online advertising is. And as a candidate, I'm shocked that there are no disclosure requirements around it. We don't know who's paying for what at all in the world of online advertising right now.
Rosa. So I'm running as a progressive, but I'm also running on a few issues. Number one, I'm not receiving any PAC money, period. Any corporate PAC money or lobbying money has to keep its hands off of my specific campaign. The reason why that's really important to me is because when I decided to do this and run for Congress, one of the common themes that I kept receiving was get $100,000 first and then come back and talk to us. But I don't want to play that game to change the game. I'm going to go into this already changing the game by making sure that my campaign is only funded by local donations, and we have over 4,000 individual donors with very, very small donations. Our average has turned out to be $7.13, which that gives you some idea of the area that we live in. We don't live in Richelieu, we live in a very poor community. The second, of course, is overturning Citizens United, making sure that we get that money out of politics at the higher level, because you know that when it comes to next year's election, McClintock gets a return investment. That's what's happening. And the last thing, and I promise I'll be really quick, is that I want to make sure that we implement something at the federal level very similar to AB 256, which I supported wholeheartedly here in California, to create that transparency in our advertisements where the top 3 donors are clearly stated in the advertisement. Nice.
Okay, next question. What congressional committee or committees would you want to be part of, and why are you especially well qualified to serve on that committee? And who's first?
Regina.
So in terms of my own background and the unique strengths that I bring to the table, I think I'm actually most qualified to be giving advice and developing policy around immigration. But my priorities are the priorities of this district. And so the committees that I would most want to serve on would be the House Natural Resources Committee. I think that's so critical in a district that's around 50% federal lands, where, again, the policies that are set in that committee affect our economy in ways that are really important. I also think the Committee on Education and the Workforce, for all the reasons we've been discussing tonight, that we really need to be focused on investing in people and growing our economy that way. The Sierra Forward poll that was done recently actually found that education, access to a high-quality education, regardless of financial circumstance, is the top issue in this district. It's the top thing people believe in. And I think I'm uniquely qualified to be speaking about that and working on it. I'm from the public schools here. I've then gone on to work in higher education, and I've been lucky to be the recipient of a great education, a lot of scholarships and fellowships along the way, and I want to be fighting for those same opportunities to be there for you and for your kids too.
Rose is next. Oh, I'm sorry. So because of my background, there's a few things that I could probably go in there and talk about my expertise in my own experiences, because I think that's one of the things that we're lacking in Congress is this massive disconnect from our representatives and the people that they represent, or don't represent in our case. So one of the ones that I really want to advocate for, again, is just like Regina said, education and the workforce is extremely important. Not just for me, when I decided to go back to school after the recession hit, it was a very, very tough choice for me to decide to do that because the lack of funds was just not there. Every single decision that I made after that was dictated by how much money I could invest in my education, from a $30 a week budget for groceries to taking 27 units per semester at 2 different schools just to finish as fast as I could because I was on a tight budget. So education for me at the K-12 level and higher education and vocational programs is paramount.
Jessica.
So first I would be on the Natural Resources Committee, as that has the most direct impact on our community, and that's where Tom McClintock is the most dangerous. So we're gonna switch him out, and we'll get a good, strong advocate in there. I think the other committees I would be on would be the Appropriations Committee and likely the Intelligence Committee. I have actually worked on the Hill with the Appropriations Committees before. That is where you can have the biggest influence and bring the biggest resources back to your district, where you have a lot of sway and can really be an effective advocate and leader for our community. So I would position myself strategically to work for all of you in a really strong way. On the Intelligence Committee, my career has been in national security strategy, so I've held a top secret clearance, for most of my career. And considering we had Russia launch an active attack on our democracy this last year, I think the place where I could be the most effective as a strategist to ensure that we are protecting our country is on one of the intelligence committees to ensure that we do not allow this to ever happen again.
Regina. Oh.
I'm sorry.
Question first. Yeah. Questions first.
Speaking of stray thoughts, what are your thoughts on legalizing cannabis federally?
Oh, here we go. Oh, guess what, Jessica? You're the first one to answer that question.
I was down in Calaveras County a few months ago talking to the CAL FIRE chief and some of the local supervisors, and discovered that cannabis became a huge crop in that district, or in that county, because of the Butte fire. After the fire, there's this huge land grab for cannabis. The county started issuing permits, but they didn't have a regulatory system in place to really monitor it effectively. They didn't have the staff to be able to keep an eye on it. One of the challenges that they were finding is that cannabis is still, because it's illegal at the federal level, it is a cash economy. So all of these guys, they keep their money in cash. They can't put it in the bank because their FDIC bank's assets will be frozen. They're not able to check on pesticides or treat it like a regular crop. So how do we mitigate this and turn it into a crop rather than a culture? Like, as a cash economy, it's inviting cartels to come in. And so for the counties that have legalized it, let me be clear. What I can do at the federal level is pass a law using a states' rights argument that allows a pass for states that have legalized a particular crop, that would allow these guys to put their money in banks, to have the type of oversight, to not make it appealing to cartels, and then allow this for the counties and communities that approve it to be something that is safe and productive for our economies, rather than a drag or an invitation for criminal activity.
Regina.
So in my academic work and my research, I've actually spent a lot of time doing field research in Central America in places where narco-trafficking is rampant. I was even briefly detained by narco-traffickers once. And so I absolutely agree with the risks, and I see the problems structurally that come with having an illicit economy in our midst. States are taking action toward legalization one after the other, and I think the federal government needs to catch up and needs to realize that this is moving forward and that we need to do so in a responsible way. So at the federal level, I'd be in favor of moving marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2. I'm also in favor of the federal government allowing states to set up state-chartered banks that provide an alternative, that provide a way forward for folks who are doing this in areas where it's legal to be able to be depositing their money and to be joining the licit economy rather than the illicit economy. Because I've seen what happens when drug trafficking runs rampant, and I can't bear to see that happen here in our district.
Rosa.
Okay, so I'll start off by saying that I attended Humboldt State. I knew that was going to happen. You guys are going to laugh. But there's two things that I learned while I was up there. Number one is how bad it got when the cannabis industry was not regulated and the damages that it caused to the environment. So that is one of the reasons why I support legalizing cannabis at the federal level. We've not only seen the benefits of cannabis in states that have allowed it to come in, this overflow of funds, but it has also decriminalized it. So we're not continuing this war on drugs for a drug that is very helpful for medicinal purposes and can now be used recreationally. In California, the way that the law will implement it into use is going to be in a way that we monitor it as an agricultural product. And I know that one of the reasons why Calaveras County was having such problems is because this happened right before the laws take effect next year. And one of the reasons why this happened, of course, was because of our insurance companies decided to not pay out the benefits to the people who lost their homes, and instead were able to sell quickly to the highest bidder. And I met with the, just last thing, with the Cannabis Alliance of California and talked to them about how they're going to implement the new law from county to county. And they are working diligently throughout all the 10 counties here in California because we're very agricultural, and they're creating jobs that not only provide housing, but also provide healthcare and 3 times the pay that these farm labor workers were making before.
Next question. I love this one as a father of a twice elected 5th grade president, Rosie, who's here somewhere. How would you motivate teens and young voters to be involved in politics? And who's first?
Rosa.
I think I got the pattern down. So I just met someone who's going to be running for class president here locally in the high school. But I also started at my high school level. In my elementary school level. I ran for vice president in 5th grade and I won. The last elected position that I was in was at Humboldt. I was the vice president for our Geographical Society of America there. So I believe that engaging our youth in politics really gets them to understand why it's so important for us to vote, why it's so important to organize and stay engaged. And in our campaign, we actually have, outside of my daughter, who's in 7th grade, we have 3 other 7th graders. We have high school students who are working on our campaign, who knock on doors, who talk to people in this district about the issues. And I think, outside of that, we're doing the 18 by 2018 program, where I'm attending high schools, talking to the high school students about filing early or pre-registering for voting in the next election. And getting them excited about why it's important for them to get out to the polls, not just get excited about the issues, but get them out to the polls.
Jessica.
Yeah, our teens and our millennials, they need to feel inspired in order to engage. A lot of times they disengage because they feel like they can't have an impact with what they're doing, and they get disillusioned and step away. So I am running a campaign that is designed to inspire them, to make them feel that they can see the value of their work. So we're doing things like community service campaigns. We came here to South Lake Tahoe and did a lake cleanup, and we are doing activities where they can actually feel the impact of their work. I've been really excited and thrilled to have a lot of teenagers and youth coming out and actually joining us on our campaign as fellows, and they are our social media gurus, if you're seeing that go out there. Actually, my very first campaign team member back in April was a 13-year-old girl. So we are getting the youth inspired and excited. I have been talking to a lot of the high schools to get them inspired to vote and get engaged, because they are recognizing that this is their democracy, and that investing in it now and getting them engaged now is something that will pay off for the rest of our lives.
Regina.
Yeah, so I've also been out visiting our schools, not yet here in South Lake, but I was out at Tahoe Truckee High School, for example, and we need to be registering our high school students. They can pre-register to vote now, as some other folks were saying. That's a fantastic initiative that we should absolutely be supporting and encouraging teachers to do that and working with them on that. But I also think we need to be not just inspiring younger people, but empowering them and bringing them in and letting them lend their skills to our campaign. So we have so many volunteers who have been organized into teams. They're doing their own projects now. And just even this week at a house party, I had a bunch of teenagers and high school students who want to join our video production team, for example, because they're really, really good at making cell phone videos. And then they put them out, and they edit them, and they make them funny, and they put great music, and they do funny things like we had one of our younger volunteers drive from Tom McClintock's house in Elk Grove and then drive into our district and do it all on fast forward and show how far away it really is. And something around 11,000 people in our district watched that video, and we haven't done the analytics, but I suspect that they were younger. So I think that we empower them, we get them to put their skills to use, and then we reach out in a peer-to-peer way to spread the message around the campaign.
Okay, this will be the final question before your final remarks to us all. So that is, if you do not receive the endorsement of the Democratic Party and another candidate is endorsed, will you support that candidate?
Rosa.
I'm gonna answer that question with a, I'll use this now, 'cause my voice is fine. I'm gonna answer that question with a yes and a no. I really feel strongly about this election that I think it would be amazing if two of us at least were able to get through the primary and not McClintock, period. That would be extraordinary. But of course, I am going to support the candidate that our party puts forward because we have an enormous district, I talked about this earlier, encompasses 10 counties. So we need the footwork. We will only flip this district if we organize, if we get people out to knock on doors, to talk about the issues, to register voters. So one of the things that my campaign is doing right now is while we're knocking on doors, talking about those issues, we're also registering voters. And that's not going to just help me. It's going to help our district overall. It's going to help every single one of these counties flip to blue because we need to build our bench. So that is what I'm completely devoted to do, and that's what I've been doing for a long time as an activist, as an organizer. Like I mentioned from the beginning of Occupy until now with the indivisible movements and getting people engaged. So yes.
Regina.
Yes, absolutely. And let me tell you why. You know, I'd like to expand on something I was trying to answer in about 10 seconds earlier, which is laying out what I think is the best strategy for actually winning here in this district. I was the person who came up with this idea in the first place, and I'm happy to say I think a lot of people broadly in the Democratic Party here have accepted it now. Here's what we do. We get one candidate endorsed in either January or February through the party's processes. Everybody else supports that person, and we put one endorsed Democrat on the ballot in June. And I've always said, we campaign as though that is a general election. When we call that June election a primary, it's very confusing. It implies to people they should only come out and vote if they care about intra-party wrangling, or if they belong to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Here's what we do. We rebrand it as the first round of the general election, because that's what it is. It's a head-to-head competition with one ballot, one Democrat, and Tom McClintock on it. And we get more votes than Tom McClintock. We can do that through a good get-out-the-vote effort in June. That will be the political earthquake we need to get the resources, to get our allies activated, and to build out a great ground operation going into the November election where we win.
Jessica.
First, how amazing it is that we have 3 women running. This is what new politics looks like. And I am very committed to supporting women running for office, and so I'm going to hold up that standard. And, you know, but here's why I think I'm going to be the one to take on McClintock. You know, here's why I'm running, because I think I'm our best shot at getting our community back, and it would be my honor and privilege to be able to serve our community. You know, I survived Baghdad. I have been shot at. I've hiked 500 miles by myself on the Pacific Crest Trail, the entire length of our district. I can take Tom McClintock because I'm made of steel. And we are running a strong and professional campaign that is bringing the resources and the national attention to our district. I was so honored to be selected by a group called The Arena, which was made up of Obama's 2008 strategists who were looking for candidates across the country that they felt would change the political culture, bridge the political divide, and win in red districts. And they selected 10 candidates across the country, and I was one of them.
All right. Let's give our candidates a round of applause. But we're not through yet, because you guys took such a long break. We're going to go a little bit after 8 o'clock, because I think this is a very important part of this thing. And this is where we're going to give each candidate 2 minutes for a closing statement. And Jessica, you were drawn first.
Okay. You know, my family spans the entire geographic and socioeconomic spectrum of our district. We have loggers and lawyers and firefighters and police officers, school teachers and janitors. So everything that impacts our district impacts my family directly. I have spent my career around the world dedicating my life to public service. I have served in India and in Burma and in some of the toughest places on earth because I felt like I was working towards protecting and serving my country that I love. But now at home, there's a danger. And so I am stepping up to continue to serve, to continue this life of public service. I am not a professional politician. I'm not from Southern California, unlike Tom McClintock. I am actually from our community, and I love every aspect of it, and I am dedicated to service. When I signed on as a public servant, I took an oath. And it's an oath to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. This is not an oath to defend a political party. This is not an oath to defend a personality or a president. This is an oath to defend the very foundation of our democracy. And our democracy, our Constitution, was written to bring dialogue into its very fabric. It is designed to bring groups with different perspectives and different opinions together to find solutions to common problems. So when we have a representative right now who stands up and says, "Only my party," and who only advocates for his narrow political philosophy, abandoning his people, he is rendering our democracy inept. This is a man who is making a mockery of our Constitution, and that is not good enough for me. And that's not good enough for you. So I'm launching something I'm calling the New Morse Code. This is my personal code of conduct to ensure that we do not play partisan games, that I will not sacrifice our community for a political party or an ideology. I will always work for the interests and the long-term solutions of the members of our community, because that is who I am who I am fighting to serve, and it will be my great honor to continue to serve you in Congress.
Rosa.
So I'm going to start off by saying I wasn't born in the United States, but I am an American by choice. I've decided that I want to represent the people of this district because the problems of this district are my problems. I grew up here. I raised my family here. I started my business here. I've never left for a period longer than a year, period. So every single time that I've been working here has only been to elevate my community. I was the chair for the Kids Count Head Start program for 2 years, making sure that we have the funding for early childhood development here at home. I want to make sure that our children are given the opportunities to have equity in our K-12 system, because I fought for that for my own daughter, and I continue fighting for it today. I want to let you know too that there are ways that we can flip this district and have one person in our office who represents every single one of you. Because I represent a lot of minorities, but overall I represent the working class. And that's who I'm going to be fighting for. I've been endorsed by 3 national endorsements. I have 1 huge Democratic endorsement. I have 2 unions who I still can't announce until a month or 2 from now. And I have over 2/3 of some of the delegates I am going to need to get that nomination from the party. That's what I've been working for. I haven't been chasing money, and I haven't been chasing the same strategy that's been used over and over and over and has lost us election after election. And what we saw last Tuesday was an overhaul, this blue wave that was going on. But every single one of those waves, let me tell you, was won by a progressive Democrat. Because our populist message resonates with every single American who is struggling to make it right now. Those endorsements that I have, the people who are behind me, my volunteers who work relentlessly, we have 0 paid staff. So every single person who works on my campaign, they do it because they believe in me and they believe in my message, and they know, they've seen me when I fight to stand up for others. And I ask you to vote for me in this upcoming election, and I ask to get your support right now so that we can start knocking on these doors and flip this district once and for all.
Regina.
2018 is our opportunity to do something amazing here in this district. Nobody thought this district could be competitive. Nobody thought Tom McClintock could be beaten, and here we are on the cusp of doing it, having made it into the national media. Our campaign was the first to get national coverage for this district this summer, for example. Now our district is being targeted by the Democratic Party at the national level. That's fantastic. And we need to make the most of this opportunity. I'm asking for your support in the endorsement process that's coming up in January, because I believe that we've built the strongest campaign to take on McClintock next year. I'm from the district here, but have national and international experience to be an effective advocate. I've got real policy positions, and I share a lot of the values and concerns that's been expressed up here tonight, but I'm committed to taking concrete steps to actually get there and get things done for you in Congress. I've also made credible commitments to be an independent voice for our district. My campaign is not being run by party insiders or political operatives from the Democratic Party at the national level. It's being run by you, and we're focusing on the issues that are important here in the district and doing things in a grassroots way, but also raising the resources necessary to be competitive. I think we've got the balance we need of grassroots and serious professionalization to take on McClintock next year. And that really matters, because that is how this district has almost been won before by Democrats. Some of you might remember 2006 and 2008, when Charlie Brown almost won. I'm really proud to have quite a few of his volunteers and even former staff working on our campaign now as volunteers. But do you remember 1990 and 1992? I was recently lucky enough to meet Pat Malberg, who ran then. And yes, she's a woman, and yes, she almost won twice, once getting 49% of the vote. And when I was talking with her, we discovered an amazing coincidence, which was that back then her logo was also the golden poppy. I had no idea of that when I chose our logo, but I chose it very intentionally to be something that's a symbol of the region, to tap into people's pride in the region, and something that's nonpartisan. Our colors are orange and green. That almost worked before, and I think in 2018, that's the year we'll actually see it work. So I like to say, go Poppy, go.
All right, let's give another round of applause. November 6th this year marks the countdown to November 6th, 2018. When you are voting, and I know there's a primary coming on, but I really like how you set it up, preparation for the general election. You are voting, and let's just speed everything up, and suppose we are now at November 6th, 2018. And you're looking at those results and you're all biting your nails, trying to figure out, oh my gosh, are we gonna really flip this district blue, or what is it gonna happen? There's going to be a moment when you're going to ask yourself, did I do enough? So I am asking you to take a moment to think about that and get involved now. You have heard these three wonderful, articulate, intelligent women talk about how difficult it's going to be to flip this district. It's going to require a lot of commitment from all of us to get out the vote, to engage our young people, to get those who have declared no party to come and support this candidate. And let's flip that district so that come election day, November 6, 2018, we can say, I did enough and I flipped this district blue. So, I'm sure we have a few minutes if you want to come and ask some questions of the candidates, if you guys are willing to stay afterwards. Again, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for coming out here, especially given the weather.
Give us your surveys, Norma.
Okay, and we want to make sure that you give us your surveys as you leave. Make sure we get those surveys. Also, shameless self-promotion, we have membership sign up for the local Democratic Club, as well as registering to vote here. Thank you, thank you, thank you.